Have you ever noticed how God can teach us when we least expect it? We don't even see it coming, and yet he teaches us. Abram's a great example. There he was at the age of 99. I'm sure pretty confident of how this last chapter of his life would unfold. And then God appears and reveals what he intends and what he offers Abram and Sarai. My brothers and sisters, God can do the same for us. And I'd be willing to bet has for each one of you in varied ways. Sometimes God reaches us by bringing us back in time. I mentioned earlier this week about going with my priest brothers for a day of recollection, where I went to camp at age 9, and obviously never could have predicted I'd return a priest. God is full of surprises. Well, yesterday I celebrated a funeral mass for my friend's dad, Mr. Paul Hannon, at St. Teresa's in West Roxbury. For those of you online, it's right in Boston. And it was the church that my parents, my brother, and I went to in Boston, our very first church, going even further back in time than age 9. And it evoked many thoughts. But what caught my attention most yesterday was the presider, Father Capone's homily about Mr. Hannon's faith and his living a life of full communion with God. This is what God invited Abram and his wife Sarai into with his covenant. And it is what God invites each one of us to in our baptism into the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus. Father Capone spoke of Mr. Hannon's fruitful life. He highlighted a marriage of 68 years. Wow, I know. And of the 8 children that God blessed him and Mrs. Hannon with, not to mention the many grandchildren and great-grandchildren. 2 of them spoke about their gratitude to God for the love and the example of Mr. and Mrs. Hannon that was shared with all of them through their faith and their love for God and their family. Hearing the story of Abram and Sarai, who would become Abraham and Sarah, and of Mr. and Mrs. Hannon, can cause us to reflect on our relationship with God and with our families. As imperfect as we or our families may be, this can allow us to think about them and how God wants us to be in union with him so that he may guide and heal and nourish us and our families in this life that leads to the next. Well, today's gospel reminded me of another part of the homily too, when Father Capone said, Mr. Hannon, was a faithful Sunday and many times daily communicant, called to ask if he could receive the sacrament of the sick and Holy Communion, not just once, but at several key points in Mr. Hannon's life. Just as the leper went right to Jesus and asked for healing. We are likewise invited to do the same. I would say that either for you or your loved ones, don't wait until you think it's the very end. Approach the priest, approach the deacon, or whomever in your parish you can reach out to and ask for that sacrament. Today, God reminds us of this gracious offer that he wants to give us. After the Mass, as I prepared to leave the church parking lot, I said a prayer for the soul of Mr. Hannon and for the consolation for his family and for his family's faith to grow in the example of what Mr. and Mrs. Hannon lived, a life of friendship and a full communion with God. And I also thank God for teaching me and bringing me back to where I first experienced the beauty and the grace found in the celebration of the Mass with my family. My brothers and sisters, may we always listen. May we always be open and ready for God's invitation so that we may live a life in full communion with him, and so that our families may share in the joy and the love of being united to God. And may we never hesitate to teach our families through our actions and words so that they may have memories to draw upon when it is our time to go home to God. My brothers and sisters, may God bless you. Let us listen to God and let us joyfully be surprised.